Imagine Buffalo program and another great virtual Imagine lecture hosted by the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. Thank you so much for joining us today. This program is created by ImagineLifelongLearning.com and the Center for the Study of Arts and Architecture, History and Nature, or as I pronounce the acronym, Cezanne. We're going to start with our speaker shortly, but first, a little housekeeping. Everyone watching will be muted during our speaker's presentation, which will last about 15 minutes. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. If you do have a question, please type it into the chat box and we'll get to as many as we can. This program is being recorded. You'll be able to watch it again later on the library's Facebook and YouTube channel pages. As a reminder, we'll be here on Zoom every Tuesday at 12:30 p.m. at the same link with a great lineup of local speakers. Now, today is the fourth Tuesday of the month when we focus on nature and science. We have two primary themes in the Imagine series. Today's theme is to imagine a healthy, wealthy, and sustainable community. Then we have to imagine place-based lifelong learning. Our speaker is John Zak, who is a former radio and TV news reporter and who authored the recently released book, The Day the Buffalo River Burned, The Incredible Story of Stanley P. Spivak. He also wrote The Train Man and is currently researching the 1954 Cleveland Hills school fire, among the deadliest school fires in American history. That'll be for his next book. John has twice been honored as Citizen of the Year and has served as a board member for the Buffalo and Erie County Association of Contracting Libraries, as well as the former Buffalo Columbus Hospital. He has worked with Medaille College, Canisius College, and the Buffalo Bills, and is an active amateur radio ham operator, licensed, in fact, since 1957. And now, let's welcome John Zak. John?
Dennis, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity you've given me to talk about my book. I've looked at a number of emails associated with my appearance this afternoon, and a lot of people have written back and forth saying, you know, where can I get a copy of this book? I've looked everywhere. I've been everywhere. I just can't find a copy of the book anywhere. And I think maybe during the course of this presentation, I can explain to you why that situation exists. Unfortunately, it doesn't look good in the future for local authors. And so more on that coming up. But my book, The Day the Buffalo River Burned, is the result of a little more than 40 years of preparation. Now, back in 1983 or 84, I was privileged to be invited by the Speciac family when Stan Spivak was honored in having a scholarship named in his honor at Canisius College for students involved in conservation and the environment. It was funded by his son, John, who is a very close friend of mine who recently passed away, and his employer at the time, Dean Witter Reynolds, along with his good friend, Frank Perna. Unfortunately, plans to have a book written about the life of Stan Spivak never materialized. Albert Glover, the former director of the Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society, which is now just the Buffalo History Museum, he passed away at the age of 91, and the fruition of all his research and work never became a book, and everything has just languished in obscurity and just sat on a shelf. until about 2.5 years ago when I began working on this project. First of all, just so everyone who's watching now knows what Stan Spivak accomplished during the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. If it were not for the passion of this man and his work and his fighting of all the industrial and municipal polluters that lined our Buffalo River from South Ogden all the way to the mouth of the river where it empties into the Buffalo Harbor and into the Niagara River. If it were not for this man, canal side and everything that we have been enjoying on our Buffalo waterfront, all of this would have been delayed by decades. It would have been delayed by decades. There's absolutely there's no question. About 3 years ago, I got a call from Stan Spivak's son, John, who I had mentioned has been and always has been a very close friend. And he inquired as to whether or not I would like to work on this project. And I said, oh my God, I thought you'd never ask. And so all the research began. And going through the boxes and boxes and boxes of material that Stan Spivak's family had donated to the Buffalo History Museum, I began to know a lot about Stan Spivak himself, about the family, about his passion for conservation and the environment, and about the infamous polluters of our Buffalo River. You know what we're dealing with now? We're dealing with a pandemic. I mean, it's a bad one. But you know, some 65 years before Stan Spivak was born, he was born in 1916, the Buffalo River was already polluted. Now, some of you are saying, well, 65 years before Stan Spivak was born and the river was already polluted, that would be like 1850. Right, exactly, 1850. Now you're saying, but wasn't everything great back then? Wasn't the river pristine? No, not even close. You know why? Because of the way many of us, if not all of us, conducted our lives back then. We weren't exactly the cleanest people on earth. Excrement, other types of contamination and pollution during the day and during the night were just dumped into buckets. And during the cover of darkness, where do you think all this stuff wound up? It wound up being collected sometimes commercially and sometimes clandestinely by people who just took those buckets and dumped human waste and other contaminants on the nearest vacant lot. Now, heavy rains came along and they just washed all of this excrement and pollution, guess where? Into what sewers there were and directly into the Buffalo River, right from our watershed. And the river became polluted mainly because of municipal neglect back then. And we have an infrastructure right now that really needs to be addressed. But it was terrible back then in 1850. We're all concerned now about this coronavirus pandemic, but during the 1850s, the cholera that swept the city and was largely attributed to contaminated drinking water came as a result of people washing their waste into places like the Buffalo River and other waterways. And people who already had the disease just added to the problem. Back in 1854, as many as 5% of the people who died in Buffalo died because of contaminated drinking water. A few years later, the president's son, Abraham Lincoln's 6-year-old son, died of typhoid. And they assumed back then, after an investigation, that the youngster and even some members of the president's cabinet became ill because of drinking water, not that was coming from the White House well, but was actually delivered to the White House. So we had a situation here in Buffalo where disease was spreading like wildfire, and it was all because the sewer system that existed back then, along with a contaminated Buffalo River that was just emptying into the Niagara River, was actually dumping contaminated waste near our source of drinking water. And so people who were relying on clean drinking water were drinking something that was contaminated. And as a result, like I say, 5% of the people in Buffalo back in 1854 died of cholera. And the reason I bring that up is because Stan Spivak, and I wrote about it in my book, Stan Spivak during the 1970s had taken a trip to St. Croix, which is pristine country in the Caribbean. And he was asked to leave and get out by local officials because he was there causing trouble, they said. And what he did back then was visit an outfall. And he mentioned, you know, St. Croix and the Virgin Islands, a US territory, was dumping contaminated water from these dumping sites, like I described Buffalo had in the 1850s. They were dumping it right into the Caribbean. And he goes, you have the entire Caribbean Sea, but you're dumping it within a few hundred yards away from a water intake. He says, are you crazy? And they didn't want to have anything to do with that. They said, you know, just leave. But, you know, back to the pollution of the Buffalo River, let's get right down to that. It only became worse after the 1850 drinking water debacle. The drinking water was finally cleared up after about 10 years, and the mortality rate began to be slowly reduced. But after that, like many US cities across the country, rivers and creeks like the Buffalo River were lined with industry and outlets for municipal waste. And all this stuff just ran down the river and dumped into Buffalo Harbor, dumped into the Niagara River. A lot of it became sediment that was several feet thick and then 10, 12 feet in depth in the bottom of the river. But you know, Stan Spivak noticed that this was killing wildlife. It was killing aquatic life. All the fish were dying. There were dead fish all over Buffalo Harbor, dead fish all over the creek. You went into Canada, Shirkston Quarry, Elko Beach, all those wonderful beaches up in Canada we used to enjoy. You'd go there and you couldn't go in the water. You could sit on the beach, but the water was just littered with dead fish. And Stan Spivak was almost talking to the wall because although he had a message that this was having an impact on our health, on human health, few people were listening because all of these industries along the Buffalo River, they were making life better for us. You know, the jeans that we wear, you know, Buffalo Color, Allied Chemical, they made the iconic blue dye that put that wonderful color in our denim jeans. They brought color to our newspapers and magazines. Republic Steel dumped contaminants. Stan Spivak had an iconic hatred for Saucony Vacuum, which later became Mobil Oil and Mobil Exxon, accusing them back in the 30s and 40s of actually dumping gasoline into the Buffalo River. Gasoline being a product of refining oil. Oil at that time was more important as a lubricant and a saleable product than gasoline itself, believe it or not. Bethlehem Steel later admitted dumping cyanide into the river. So all of this had a cumulative effect. The water just became so contaminated with waste, oil, phenols, color, dyes, that nothing could live. A deer or a raccoon could come along and have a drink of that water and a few days become sick and die. It kills some fish almost instantly. But because all these companies and industry that were making futuristic products that we needed to make our life better, because they were forging all these new products and adding to employment, giving people jobs, nobody complained. Nobody really complained. And that really started it all. So when Stan finally launched his campaign to get the United States government involved, then his sphere of influence began to get a little thicker, and many prominent people began to revolve around his life, and they helped him bring this to the public's attention, finally catching the attention of the President of the United States, who came here in 1966, took a tour of Buffalo Harbor, got a smell of that garbage from the Buffalo River, and finally said, I'll take care of it. It took a while, but Lyndon Johnson did. And that's when the cleanup of the Buffalo River actually began back in 1966.
Dennis, you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. John, that's quite a story. Thank you. Tell us a little bit more about the role of Lady Bird, Bobby Kennedy, people like that. How did they reinforce the discussion with the president?
Well, thank you for bringing up Bobby Kennedy, because, sometimes as I get rolling along, I get so passionate that I miss a few things. Bobby Kennedy was actually the first politician to come to the aid of Stanley Spivak. Mr. Spivak was very suspicious at the time because he was a dyed-in-the-wool Republican. If you were anything but, he might not have trusted you unless you were a close friend or neighbor. Bobby Kennedy, after the assassination of his brother, ran for the U.S. Senate here in the state of New York and was elected, beating, the venerable Kenneth Keating from Rochester, who had been an incumbent senator. But Bobby Kennedy became U.S. Senator. His staff was automatically looking for hot button issues that the senator could attach his name to and work to help resolve problems. And they found Stan Spivak here in Buffalo. And Bobby Kennedy came here and offered his help. Stan Spivak was understandably a little bit reluctant to accept, the help from a, quote, Democrat. But he finally became very trusting of Bobby Kennedy, and he really believed in Kennedy's sincerity. And so he attached himself to his office, and that's where Stan Spivak met Mary Jo Kopechne, whose own story has worldwide implications. Mary Jo Kopechne, when Bobby Kennedy would invite Stan Spivak to Washington to polish his speeches and his presentations, when he would appear before congressional subcommittees fighting water pollution, Mary Jo Kopechne was his right arm in Senator Bobby Kennedy's Washington office, helping Stan rewrite his speeches, picking a better word here and there, to get his point across. But Bobby Kennedy, yes, along with a lot of help back then from Democratic Buffalo Congressman Max McCarthy.
Well, and then again, Lady Bird, as I recall, might have just wife to husband said, what can we do to fix this problem, Lyndon? Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, well, here's what happened. Dennis. Stan Spivak, never thinking that he would even be mentioned to win an award as American Water Conservationist of the Year, not only was he just privileged to be mentioned, he became water conservationist of the year, and was honored by the Johnsons by a trip to Washington. He watched Lyndon Johnson deliver his State of the Union address and was presented with his award by Lady Bird Johnson. At that dinner, Stan Spivak, who just had this charm about him, had the First Lady's ear. And he talked her into talking her husband to come to Buffalo to see for himself. You know, largely because Lady Bird asked Stan Spivak, who's polluting? Who's polluting the Buffalo Harbor? And Stan Spivak told her, a government agency, a United States government agency, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. What? And she caught the president's ear. He agreed to come to Buffalo, and from there, the rest is history. And back then, the cleanup, although it's not complete yet, and it won't be for many, many years, that's when it all began.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned how we take for granted Canal Side, the water. Everybody likes to be walking around the water, bringing families to the water. And you've given that wonderful history going back to 1850 and probably before. But it really has been a long journey, and everything I can tell indicates that Stan Spivak was that pivot point when things change, the awareness has changed, and we're dealing with Clean Water Acts, also that affect the whole Great Lakes. Our whole consciousness in the 60s changed. Rachel Carson, Silent Spring, other things were happening that reinforced it, and we're the beneficiaries of that awareness. But we do have a task. You're absolutely right. The task is not completed.
Right. You know, one more thing I want to mention too, you know, back in the 1950s, I think it was, Stan had been invited to an assembly of local alleged polluters and other interested parties at the Buffalo History Museum. And he knew he was in for trouble then, because most of the people there were there to antagonize him. And he wound up getting a stay in another meeting later on where more people could attend. But someone else at that meeting stood up and said, you know something? The people who live along the Buffalo River, they should be thankful for all these industries and what they're dispensing into the Buffalo River, because of what they're dumping in there. Mosquitoes and flies and other deadly things can't exist, so they should be thankful. And you know, Stan thought that was a preposterous statement, and he even thought it was a joke. But you know, the guy was serious. But you know something? Not only was he serious, he was right, because nothing could live in that river, not even disease. We have Stan Spivak to be thankful for today.
Dennis, we have a couple of questions that have come in through chat. Someone wonders, John, does your book give more of a background and how he got into the environmental issues regarding Stan? Do you talk more about what his background is in the book?
Well, his background is he was a jeweler. He grew up in a very large family. There were 16 people in his family. Many of them suffered tragic deaths due to common illnesses that today could be solved with a prescription from the neighborhood pharmacy. But oh my God, it was so sad. His brothers and sisters were dying left and right because of illnesses. Stan later got a job with the Buffalo Museum of Science as a mineralogy sorter. He sorted all these minerals, but what caught his eye were minerals that glistened, you know, things that were like born in the middle of the earth millions of years ago, you know, diamonds and rubies and emeralds. And that's how he became a jeweler. And as he was saying later on in life, I was a jeweler by necessity, but I was a conservationist. That was my passion, being a conservationist.
Any others, Joy?
Yep, couple more here. Did Stan dream of a rebirth on the Buffalo waterfront?
You know, I think he always did. I think he always did. When he died, things, even though it was in the 1990s, things were not getting much better. They really were not getting much better. They are now. Funny thing though, when you ask about, you know, where we are today in terms of cleaning up the Buffalo River, although you can go fishing in the Buffalo River now, I'm not positive, someone else may be able to help with that, but I'm not positive you can eat the fish caught in the Buffalo River. But the water is remarkably cleaner than it was back then when he started this fight. But we are only 2/3 complete. When the Buffalo River is now removed from the endangered list of US rivers, and hopefully that might happen next year, it will only be 2/3 cleaned up. Don't forget, a few years ago, I think it was 2013 or 2015, you may have heard of the infamous Floatables Act. You know, people walking around canal side were seeing human excrement, condoms, tampons, all sorts of things floating in the river. This stuff was coming in from the sewer system of Buffalo. And then immediately a $15 million program called the Anti-Floatables Act was put into play, because the Buffalo News had a headline that said, Buffalo Harbor becomes a toilet. But that was quickly corrected. So it shows you how quickly US government can do something if they really want to. If this had happened back in the 1930s, 40s, or 50s, nothing probably would have been done.
Okay, we've got two quick questions and then probably time to wrap it up. What does the title of the book refer to?
Good question. And I should have addressed that right at the top. You know, it's a funny thing. I've been in media for 57 years. And in 1968, I was well along in my career. I do not remember the fire on the Buffalo River. There were actually 3 of them. There were actually 3 fires, all caused by oil pollution. But it happened on January 24th, 1968. The fire department was called, it was about 7 above 0. When they got there, they found that it was not the South Park Avenue lift bridge who called in the fire, but it was fire on the surface of the river itself. I mean, today we would have had 1,000 pictures, you know, to choose from. I could not find one photograph of the fire, unlike the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, where there were many, many photographs of their disastrous $1 million fires on their river. But this was happening on rivers all across the industrial Northeast. But yes, the Buffalo River caught fire on January 24th, 1968. Prior to that, it had burned near the South Park Avenue, the South Ogden Street Bridge. And prior to that, on the Buffalo Canal, the ship canal, there was a fire under the International Railroad Bridge, all attributed to water pollution.
Okay, and then the final question, John, do you have, are you going to write anything else? Are you going to write another book?
Yes, I am. I'm currently working on the Cleveland Hill 1954 school fire, one of the most deadliest school fires in the history of our country. 15 children died, nearly 30 were injured, many of them badly, badly burned. And I did a lengthy documentary many years ago on the fire, but I was relegated to 1.5 minutes a day. So I have all this research and all these interviews compiled, and I'm going through all that now, and I'm researching, and I hope to do a book in the next couple of years on the Cleveland Hill school fire.
So I'm sorry, Dennis, I'm just gonna say one thing before you wrap up, because someone has written in the chat that they were at the school before the fire. But I think the question really is, John, is there a way people can get a hold of you? Do you have an email address or something that you want to leave so people can get in touch with you if they want to contact you about this book or an upcoming book.
Yeah, I'm sure that on your website at the conclusion of this, you might include my email address, but it's jzach, Z-A-C-H, jzach00 at gmail.com.
jzach00@gmail.com.
That's it. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Well, you're welcome, John. It's a great, I'll also mention, you had pointed out in Western New York Heritage, the fall edition, you've got a nice summary written up in there. And it may be difficult to buy the book, but I'm pleased to say the library tells me they have 14 copies available at pretty much at most of the branches, and they can be ordered online and picked up until we're able to get back in freely as we used to enjoy to do. So it's out there for those interested. Jan, you've fulfilled my friend John Spivak, Stan's one son. His passion really towards the end of his life, the last several years, was to try to get his dad's story told. I hope someday we'll be able to get some markers and things at the water's edge and continue appreciating the people that preceded us who help us enjoy what we have today. So I'm going to say thank you, John, and simply say thank all our audience for joining us today. We're here next Tuesday, same time, same Zoom link, when we will talk with John Hartman from get his firm here, Signity Financial. His topic will be a hot topic today on investment screens, ESG, which stands for Environment, Sustainability, and Governance. So look forward to that. Folks, be well, have a good afternoon, a blessed Christmas and holiday season. Good day.